Welcome back to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.
Yeah.
We're all about packing in as much knowledge as we can.
Right.
Even if you only have a few minutes.
Exactly.
And our AI narrator will help you through all those big ideas and make those little breaks in your day actually count for something.
Absolutely.
So today we're diving into
Yes.
A Peace to End All Peace by David Fromkin.
All right.
This book looks at the history of the Middle East,
Right.
especially what happened during and after World War I.
Interesting.
And it asks this big question.
Okay.
Was a lasting peace even possible back then?
Well, Fromkin's work is really something because he doesn't just, tell us what happened.
Right.
He digs into the choices people made and how those choices affected everything.
I see.
He argues that the conflicts we see today, well, they actually started way back then.
Wow, over a century ago.
Yeah.
So Fromkin starts by painting this picture
Okay.
of the Ottoman Empire at the beginning of the 20th century.
Oh, right.
It was huge and diverse,
Right.
but it was falling apart.
Yeah.
So what was going on beneath the surface?
Well, the Young Turks were in charge,
Right.
and they were really struggling.
Okay.
On one hand, they wanted to modernize and reform things,
Mhm.
but on the other hand, they also wanted to make sure the Turkish people were dominant,
Oh, I see.
over all the different groups in the empire.
So that created tension.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of resentment built up because of that.
And of course, we have to talk about the capitulations.
Oh, right, those concessions.
Yeah.
Europeans got special treatment in the empire.
Exactly. Economically and legally.
The capitulations weren't just about the economics, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Fromkin says they really hurt the Ottoman elite.
In what way?
Like, it was humiliating.
Oh, so
And that's what made nationalist movements grow.
like Mustafa Kemal's movement.
Exactly.
Now, Fromkin takes us to 1914.
Okay.
Winston Churchill, he's the first Lord of the Admiralty,
A young guy.
makes this big decision
What was that?
to take 2 battleships
Oh, wow.
that Britain was building for the Ottomans.
Seriously?
Yeah, could that have been what pushed them toward Germany?
Well, a lot of people think that was the main reason,
Mm-hmm.
but Fromkin doesn't agree.
Really?
He says they were already leaning that way
Why is that?
because of strategy and because they already resented Britain and France.
Ah.
So taking the battleships didn't help?
But it probably didn't change their minds either.
Right.
But Churchill's actions must have had consequences.
Oh, definitely.
What were they?
Well, it shows how tricky diplomacy can be
Yeah.
and how even planned moves can backfire.
Right.
It also shows how Churchill liked to take risks.
Which we see even more in the Dardanelles.
Oh, the Dardanelles.
Right.
Churchill's big gamble.
He wanted to force a way through to the Black Sea.
Yeah, he thought a quick win there would knock the Ottomans out.
But it didn't work out that way.
No, it didn't.
What went wrong?
Well, Fromkin says Churchill was way too confident in the Navy.
The Ottomans, with German help, fought back hard.
So the first attack failed,
And then they tried to invade Gallipoli.
which was a disaster.
Total disaster.
The Allies lost a lot of men.
Yeah. And in the end, they had to give up.
So what happened because of this huge failure?
Well, it really hurt Churchill's career.
Oh, wow.
It contributed to the fall of the government,
Mm-hmm.
and the military was not happy with him.
I bet.
It also showed that the war in the East was way more complicated than people thought.
Okay, so we've got these internal tensions,
Right.
a controversial move with the battleships,
Uh-huh.
and a disastrous military campaign.
Yeah.
It seems like things are going to get even worse.
Absolutely.
But what I find really interesting are the secret agreements happening in the background.
It's like a whole other story going on.
Yeah, like a spy thriller.
Exactly.
So Fromkin reveals the Sykes-Picot Agreement,
Oh, yeah.
this secret deal between Britain and France.
Dividing up the Middle East
Exactly.
into their own little zones.
And we can't forget about Russia. No, they wanted Constantinople and the Straits.
Right. And they got promises in the Constantinople Agreement.
All these secret deals.
Yeah.
They're the opposite of what Woodrow Wilson wanted.
Yeah. His 14 points were all about self-determination.
Right, letting nations decide their own future.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all.
Fromkin shows us the clash between Wilson's idealism and what the European powers really did.
Right, they were all about power and control.
So the question is,
Yeah.
if they wanted peace, were these secret deals actually making things worse?
That's exactly what Fromkin argues.
Really?
He says these agreements, they were all about empires, and they didn't care about the people who actually lived there. They ignored all the different ethnic and religious groups.
And that led to the problems we see today.
Absolutely. Those agreements set the stage for everything that's going on in the Middle East.
It's hard to believe that decisions made during a war could have such a lasting impact.
I know, it's incredible.
And all this was happening in secret.
It really shapes how we understand the region today.
And that's just the start.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Frumkin takes us into the Arab Revolt.
Where history and myth get all tangled up.
Right. The Arab Revolt was led by Sharif Hussein of Mecca,
And his sons.
including the famous T.E. Lawrence of Arabia.
Exactly.
It's often seen as this unified Arab uprising against the Ottomans.
Right, this romantic idea of Arab independence.
But is that the whole truth?
Well, Frumkin challenges that narrative.
Okay.
He says that while the revolt was important,
Mhm.
it wasn't the main reason the Ottomans lost.
Interesting.
He says it was limited in scope,
Oh,
and they needed a lot of help from the British.
I see.
And the Arab world wasn't really united.
So the story we see in movies,
It's not the whole story.
it's too simple.
Yeah, way too simple.
Frumkin wants us to look deeper
To see all the different sides.
and understand how complicated things really were.
Exactly. The Arab revolt was just one part of a much bigger picture.
A much more complex puzzle.
Right. And as the Ottoman Empire falls apart, a new leader comes in.
Mustafa Kemal.
Yeah.
He was an Ottoman general, right?
He was, but he went against the Sultan.
Wow.
And he got the Turkish nationalists together.
To fight the Allies.
Exactly.
Kemal is such an interesting figure.
He really is.
He seems to represent this idea of never giving up.
Yeah. Like, even when everything is against you,
Frumkin does a great job telling his story.
he does.
He shows how smart Kemal was as a leader.
And how determined he was.
Yeah.
He really led the Turks to victory in their war for independence.
So after all the fighting and chaos,
Yeah.
what kind of peace came out of it?
Frumkin takes us to the settlement of 1922.
Yeah, it's not what you'd expect.
No, not at
How
all.
did that happen?
Well, the Treaty of Lausanne officially ended the Ottoman Empire,
Okay.
and that's how modern Turkey was born.
Oh, wow.
But it also led to the creation of new countries.
Like which ones?
Iraq, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon.
And they were all under control of Britain and France.
Oh, exactly.
They were mandates.
Yeah.
And these borders, they were drawn without thinking about the people who live there.
Right. They didn't care about the different ethnic and religious groups.
And that's caused problems for years.
Decades of conflict and instability.
So Frumkin says that the 1922 settlement didn't really bring peace.
He calls it a peace to end all peace.
That's a strong statement.
It is.
What does he mean by that?
He's saying that the decisions made in 1922 were supposed to make things stable.
Well, they didn't.
No, they actually created more problems.
Like what?
Well, the borders were all wrong.
Yeah.
People weren't given the right to govern themselves.
Like they were promised.
Exactly.
And the big powers still wanted to control everything. So all that is still affecting the Middle East today.
Absolutely.
And then there's the Balfour Declaration.
Oh, yeah. That little part of a letter that caused so much trouble.
It was a promise from Britain to support a Jewish homeland in Palestine.
A decision with huge consequences.
Yeah.
The Balfour Declaration shows how even small choices can have big unintended effects.
Like ripples spreading out.
Frumkin says it wasn't just about supporting Zionism.
Oh, what else is going on?
Britain also wanted to keep their power in the region after the war.
So the declaration started a conflict that's still going on.
It shows how hard it is to balance different national goals in a place like the Middle East.
Okay, so if the peace of 1922 was so messed up,
Yeah.
why didn't anyone see the problems it would cause?
Frumkin says the people making the decisions were focused on their own goals.
And their own ideas.
They wanted to keep their empires
And they didn't really care about the people in the Middle East.
or understand them.
It's like they were trying to force a European style of peace on a place that was very different.
That's a good way to put it.
And that's one of Frumkin's main points.
Yeah, he wants us to see the Middle East on its own terms.
Not try to impose solutions from outside.
He wants us to appreciate how complex it is.
So why should we care about all this now?
Why does this history matter today?
Exactly.
Well, Frumkin's book is more than just history. It's a warning.
About what?
He shows how the past shapes the present, how choices made during a war can cause problems for generations.
So understanding this history is important.
If we want to understand the Middle East today...
To see why things are so difficult, it makes you realize that peace isn't just about stopping a war. It's much more than that.
It's a process.
Delicate process.
It takes a lot of understanding and work.
We need to understand the history, the culture, and what everyone wants.
That's a lot to consider.
It is.
Frumkin's book is a wake-up call.
He makes us think about the choices we make.
And how they affect the future.
He reminds us that peace building is a continuous effort.
And knowing history is crucial for dealing with the challenges of today and tomorrow. It's a heavy thought, but it's true.
It is.
Fromkin shows us that we can't really understand the Middle East today.
Without looking back at what happened in the past.
And learning from it.
Absolutely. He challenges us to go beyond simple explanations.
And to really engage with the history of this region, to understand its complexity and its importance.
Okay, so World War I really changed the Middle East.
No doubt about it.
What specifically from that 1922 settlement is still causing problems today.
Well, the borders, for one thing.
The ones they drew up.
Yeah, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, remember?
Right. Britain and France dividing things up.
They created countries without thinking about the people who live there.
The different ethnic and religious groups.
Right, and that's led to so many internal conflicts.
And made things unstable for decades. It's like they were trying to force pieces together that don't belong.
Exactly, and then you add in the broken promises.
About self-determination.
Yeah, a lot of Arabs felt betrayed.
Because they were told they'd get independence.
And it never happened.
Fromkin says that's part of why we see Arab nationalism and Islamic fundamentalism.
It shows how decisions can have these unintended consequences.
And those consequences can last for generations.
Absolutely.
Of course, we can't forget about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Oh, right, the Balfour Declaration?
Britain wanted to support a Jewish homeland.
But they didn't really consider the Palestinians.
What they wanted or what their rights were.
It was a recipe for disaster.
And it's still going on today.
A conflict that just won't go away.
So the 1922 settlement, it seems like it didn't solve anything.
No.
It just made things worse.
Yeah, it kicked the can down the road.
Created all these problems for the future.
Fromkin's right when he says the peace was just a pause.
Just a moment of calm before the
A
storm.
reshuffling of the pieces.
That led to the turmoil we see now.
Yeah.
So is there any hope for peace in the Middle East?
It's a good question.
I mean, with all this history and all the complexity today,
It's hard to say.
is lasting peace even possible?
Well, Fromkin doesn't give us any easy answers,
Right.
but he does help us understand the root causes.
He says we have to look at history,
Not as something that's over and done with,
but as something that's still alive.
something that affects us now.
We have to learn from the past
Understand how those old decisions still shape things today.
and how past grievances can lead to conflict now.
Peace building. It's not just about signing agreements
It's about understanding the past,
and dealing with the wrongs that were done.
recognizing different cultures,
And talking to each other, honestly,
trying to find common ground,
it's a big job.
but understanding the history in Fromkin's book
A Peace to End All Peace.
is a really good place to start.
If you're ready to learn more, I highly recommend reading it.
You can find a link in our show notes.
It's a challenging read.
But it's so important if we want to understand the Middle East.
And how it affects the whole world.
And be sure to subscribe to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.
We've got more insightful book analyses coming your way,
Delivered right to your ears.
wherever you are.
Until next time, keep those minds nourished.